Welcome back, honeys. We've got a brand new set of buzzy headlines here for you. I'm pleased to say that we've been seeing some growth lately on our listenership and our Instagram follower side. Thank you, honeys, for that. It does very much help me feel like I'm not just talking into the void. It does help me to know, what you're enjoying and what you would like to hear more or less of. This is all for you guys at the end of the day, after all. So if there's anything that you need, anything that you want out of it, please let us know. Shoot us a DM or leave some commentary on your streaming platform of choice. And with that little reminder out of the way, we'll go ahead and get started. We have a few updates on headlines past to begin with. First, Frank Lloyd Wright's historic Price Tower has now officially sold to McFarland Building LLC for $1.4 million US. Price Tower was transferred to local bankruptcy court after Cynthia Blanchard filed for Chapter 7 fairly recently. Sources say that despite its bankruptcy trustee approaching hundreds of potential buyers, no additional bids were submitted before the late April deadline. Hopefully, this sale puts an end to the drama surrounding Frank Lloyd Wright's one and only skyscraper. We also had two updates surrounding Art Institute of Chicago stories. First, the Institute confirmed that it was President and Director James Rondeau who apparently stripped while aboard a flight to Germany last month, as first reported by CBS News. He has gone on voluntary leave of absence amid an ongoing investigation into those accusations. Second, they are, as promised, contesting a New York court order to restitute a drawing by Austrian expressionist Egon Schiele, one titled Russian War Prisoner from 1916, to the heirs of its original owner by securing a temporary stay of execution during their appeal pursuit. The heirs of Fritz Grunbaum argue that the Schiele works were sold illegally after his detainment by Nazis and never recovered by the family. The same heirs have already recovered a number of Schiele works from other major U.S. institutions. These include the Carnegie Museums, MoMA, and the Morgan Library. And finally, with the appointment of the first American pontiff, Robert Francis Prevost, the Vatican's museums, such as the Sistine Chapel, which have been closed for over a week during the gathering of about 133 cardinals for the conclave, will reopen somewhat soon. The museums have not yet formally announced a reopening date, but with the ending of the conclave, we expect to see the Vatican and its public spaces reopen rather quickly. In an embarrassing headline for the auction house, Sotheby's was forced to halt a controversial Buddha gem sale last week. Reuters reports that the Indian government threatened legal action against a planned Hong Kong sale of the gems, which are linked to Buddha's mortal remains, and was scheduled for last week. The pressure led Sotheby's to postpone the auction. The gems in question are a collection of several hundred ancient Indian relics allegedly found amongst the Buddha's cremated remains and dated to circa 240 to 200 BCE. Their estimated sale point was about 100 million Hong Kong dollars, which is approximately 12.9 million US. The collection has been described by Sotheby's as, quote, one of the most astonishing archaeological finds of the modern era, end quote, and, quote, of unparalleled religious, archaeological, and historical importance, end quote. The British Crown claimed this collection for itself under their own 1878 Indian Treasure Trove Act after the British engineer William Caxton Pepe dug them up on expedition. The Buddha's remains were gifted to the Buddhist monarch Ching Chulalongkorn of Siam. According to BBC News, they have since been distributed to various South Asian countries where they are venerated. In their May 5th letter to the auction house about the sale, Indian officials demanded its halt and also the return of the relics, which are known as the Pipra gems of the historical Buddha-Mauryan Empire Ashokan era. The letter states in part, quote, their sale violates Indian and international laws as well as the United Nations conventions, end quote, and it added that the auction, quote, offends the sentiments of over 500 million Buddhists worldwide, end quote. A bit of a more bizarre headline here. We heard of a museum that bought an anonymous painting of a drooling dragon for 20 million US. London's National Gallery recently purchased the relatively mysterious artwork titled The Virgin and Child with Saints Louis and Margaret, which follows the biblical narratives of these characters, kind of. Saint Margaret kneels next to the dragon in prayer, apparently unfazed by having been eaten and regurgitated by it. One of the two angels next to her holds a book of song, once thought to be a hymn by the English composer Walter Fry, but now identified as musical gibberish, while the other plucks her mouth harp. The National Gallery of London says that instrument produces, quote, a sound hardly associated with celestial harmony, end quote. The work also has Old Old Testament references hidden in the architectural details like the columns as capitals, plus biblical details like nails of crucifixion placed throughout. Research done by the National Gallery since the purchase has found a few interesting things, however. You may have noticed I didn't give a year for the painting. That's because dendrochronology only recently dated the wood surface, which is Baltic oak, frequently used in the Low Countries if you were wondering, to around 1483. The gallery's statement says that the altarpiece was first documented in 1602 at the Premonstratensian Abbey of Drongen in Ghent, Belgium, though it's unknown by experts if that was its original location. Some of the subject matter, though, suggests that it maybe was. But another detail helped art historians narrow down its date further. The design of the chain worn by St. Louis was modified in 1516, but appears in the first form here, meaning that the altarpiece was painted before that year. Gabriele Finaldi, the director of the National Gallery of London, tells the art newspaper that, quote, the work is a mysterious painting that the National Gallery has had its eye on for decades, end quote. They purchased it earlier this year as part of the bicentenary celebration. Last week also saw more good news for arts funding. The Warhol and Frankenthaler Foundations have announced an $800,000 fund amid the NEA funding losses. According to a joint announcement from both, the funds will be distributed among 80 visual arts programs at small and mid-sized organizations across the country who had previously received funding through the recently suspended National Endowment for the Arts' Challenge America grant initiative, which was designed to bring art to underserved communities. Side note, last week also saw all 10 directors who manage grant distribution at the NEA depart the agency, including the officials who led the Native Arts program and grants for Challenge America. However, the foundation's initiative grantees will be awarded $10,000 each to further these projects stalled by the NEA's revocation. We noticed the headline, honeys, as you may imagine, because arts and culture foundations are increasingly stepping up to mitigate the damage dealt by the Trump administration's budget slashes, especially to arts and humanities. Recall our headline from last week that the Mellon Foundation, the largest non-federal funder of the arts and humanities in the U.S., announced $15 million in emergency funding for the Federation of State Humanities Councils to cover for expected National Endowment for the Humanities grants, which were also revoked. And a small but important reminder right about now, honeys, the NEA budget accounts for just a fraction of the total annual federal one. In fiscal year 2024, its budget was $207 million compared to the gross government spending in the same period of $6.75 trillion. Also last week, the U.S. government finally called for Venice Biennale proposals, but only those focused on quote-unquote American values. On April 30th, the U.S. government opened the portal for national representative submissions for the 61st Venice Biennale, which will occur May through November of 2026, but with some very noticeable changes. Vanity Fair reports that submitting artists will face a whole new style from previous grant cycles. The U.S. State Department Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, or ECA, quote, works of art that reflect and promote American values, end quote, and ban participants who, quote, operate any programs promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion that violate any applicable anti-discrimination laws, end quote, though they are keeping the $375,000 funding component. Compare this to the ECA's 2023 Pavilion grant opportunity, which heavily emphasized diversity and inclusion as major points of U.S. foreign policy, and in its guidelines for proposal submissions, highlighted those that would deal with, quote, democracy, human rights, the environment, health and food security, self-determination, resiliency, and tackling shared global challenges, end quote. Yet many were also worried about the much shortened timeline for creating the work this year. Selection announcements are expected to be made September 1st, which would leave applicants with an unprecedentedly tight turnaround to submit to the international exhibition. For reference, the artist proposal for the 2024 Biennale had been selected by July of 2023, leaving approximately 11 months for preparation and facilitation of works, rather than the 8 months given in this cycle. Kathleen Ash Milby, a co-commissioner of the 2024 U.S. Pavilion and the curator of Native American art at the Portland Art Museum, told Vanity Fair that the timeline was so tight that the U.S. might well, quote, be past the point of no return, end quote, in terms of participating in the Biennale. The winner can also apparently expect the U.S. State Department to, quote, monitor site visits, end quote, to, quote, gather additional information on the recipient's ability to properly implement the project, end quote. On May May 7th, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art announced that it had laid off 20 full and 9 part-time staff members in a 7.5% reduction to the institution's total employees. It additionally eliminated 13 roles that are currently vacant or that it said would not be backfilled. 26 of those cut are members of the Office and Professional Employees International Union Local 29, which is currently involved in contract negotiations with the museum. Though the union alleged the museum gave no notice ahead of the layoffs, the museum claimed in a press release cited by our sources that they had tried to contact union reps and that union members were offered, quote, enhanced severance packages, end quote, above what was stipulated by their collective bargaining agreement. Of course, we care that the union has expressed concern over both the process and the potential long-term impact on the museum's 300-plus person workforce amid these ongoing contract talks. We also care that the financial situation of SF MoMA seems stuck in not great despite some major recent gains. As we covered in March, they received the largest corporate grant in the museum's history for a single exhibition, a $1.5 million gift from Google's philanthropy offshoot, and SF MoMA pulled in a reported $3.7 million in donations at its annual fundraising gala, Art Bash, last month. The institution acknowledged these producing quote-unquote strong gains in the layoff announcement, yet the cuts were still made. Hopefully, we'll soon see some explanations emerging. Headlines also announced that rain leaks from the Louvre's roof narrowly missed prize paintings last week. We covered Le Parisien's reporting of a leaked memo to the French Culture Ministry from the museum's director warning about structural damage as a threat to the museum's collections way back in January. But now we see Laurence Descartes was very correct. Last Saturday, a powerful hailstorm breached the Louvre's roof sometime in the afternoon, causing water to drip into the Sala Rosa room hosting the headlining exhibition, A New Look at Cimabue at the Origins of Italian Painting. The art newspaper's Martin Bailey, who was in the museum at the time, reported that he spotted the water coming in before the guards and that the leaks narrowly missed Giovanni Cimabue's unprotected Maesta wooden panel painting. The work is dated to circa 1280 CE and is acquired by the Louvre in 1812. It's especially susceptible to water damage as it's still in the original decorated frame, and other works were also narrowly missed. A Louvre spokesperson later confirmed to the art newspaper that it, quote, did experience some water infiltration in areas where the glass roofs are located, end quote, but emphasized that no works were damaged, in part because it closed the show to the public just 30 minutes after the first signs of leakage. This was done so firefighters could inspect the roofs, and they immediately identified the cause as, quote, a damaged glass seal, end quote. After it was replaced, the exhibition was opened again to the public on Sunday morning. Hopefully, these leaks will be the impetus the French government needs to do a little renovation. It additionally came to our attention last week that art experts have demanded Russia be ejected from ICOM for violating its code of ethics. In an open letter published Monday in Le Monde, a group of arts professionals said it intended to take the International Council of Museums, or ICOM, which is a non-governmental organization headquartered in France and sets industry standards for participating museums, to court in France if it failed to oust Russia. The letter's claims include that Russia has, quote, systematically been erasing Ukraine's centuries-old cultural identity, end quote, since the start of its invasion in 2022. Signatories of the letter include art historian Konstantin Akinsha, who curated In the Eye of the Storm, Modernism in Ukraine, 1900 to 1930, Francesca Thyssen-Bornemisza, the founder of Museums for Ukraine, and Vitaly Taitik, head of legal affairs at ICOM Ukraine. Taitik told Art News that the group is looking for two concrete measures: to, quote, exclude ICOM Russia and the Russian museum staff involved in the looting of Ukrainian collections, end quote, and he clarified that they see two paths towards these ends: negotiation or court trial in France. So, honeys, why we care / why they have a good point. First and foremost, the long-standing and well-known nature of the case. The vice chair of ICOM Ukraine, Anastasia Cherednichenko, accused Russia of committing quote-unquote cultural genocide in Ukraine and breaching the code of ethics during the organization's 2022 General Assembly, and ICOM Ukraine later accused the international museum community of being, quote, complicit in these violations, end quote, at that time if it failed to act against ICOM Russia. Furthermore, they can totally legally do this. Christian Castagna, advocacy manager for nonprofit For Ukraine, Their Freedom and Ours, told Art News, quote, because ICOM is an NGO, non-governmental organization, subject to French legislation, if it does not follow what is written in its statutes, its members can demand that ICOM's executive board respects its statutes and dismisses Russia for violating its code of ethics, end quote. The loss of the support of ICOM would be a huge blow to Russian cultural institutions and museums who would face their validity coming into question, their authority. It may also affect their ability to loan and host various shows as well as works. Last week also saw a UK art dealer plead guilty to selling art to a suspected Hezbollah financier. Ogenochukwu Ojiri pled guilty May 9th to 8 charges of failing to disclose potential terrorist financing during a court hearing in London after being charged by Metropolitan Police the day before. The headline is notable as he is, quote, the first person to be charged with a specific offense under Section 21A of the Terrorism Act 2000, end quote. A press statement from the Metropolitan Police said in part that the 8 charges occurred after an investigation into said financing by officers from the National Terrorist Financial Investigation Unit of the Police Department's Counterterrorism Command, in partnership with a few other agencies and organizations, including His Majesty's Treasury and the Met's Art and Antiques Unit. They, quote, relate to a period from October 2020 to December 2021, end quote, and the added value of the artworks that Ojiri sold to Nazem Ahmad, suspected to be a financier of terrorism, was approximately 186,000 US or 140,000 British pounds. Ahmad was charged by federal prosecutors in 2023 with 9 counts for violating and evading US sanctions through $440 million worth of imports and exports in art and diamonds alongside 8 others, including several of his family members. Prosecutor Lyndon Harris told the court in London that, quote, at the time of the transactions, Mr. Ojiri knew that Nazem Ahmad had been sanctioned in the U.S. as a suspected terrorist financier. Mr. Ojiri accessed news reports about Mr. Ahmad's designation and engaged in discussions with others about it, indicating this knowledge or suspicion, end quote. The New York Times also reported that Ojiri stated in prosecution documents summarizing the case against Ahmad that he filled out paperwork connected to the art sales for the financier in the names of, quote, other individuals suggested by Mr. Ahmad's associates in what is alleged to be an attempt to disguise the true owner of the works of art, end quote. A few obituaries this week. First for Koyo Kuou, the curator of the 2026 Venice Biennale, who passed suddenly at age 57. The New York Times reported that the celebrated Cameroonian-born curator behind some of the most significant exhibitions of African contemporary art in recent decades died unexpectedly from cancer at the age of 57 in a hospital in Basel, Switzerland. Her husband, Philippe Malle, told the Times that she'd only just received her diagnosis, and her death comes only months after being appointed the curator of the 2026 Biennale, which had made her only the second African-born curator to lead the famed event. The Venice Biennale announced her passing on Saturday, describing her as a figure of, quote, passion, intellectual rigor, and vision, end quote. Organizers were set to unveil the theme and title of her exhibition, which she'd been developing since her appointment in December 2024, in less than 2 weeks. Kuou was widely admired for her commitment to expanding the global narrative of contemporary art beyond the US and Europe, and for her special focus on African arts specifically. Our second is for Ana Pellicer, who passed at 79. Mexico's Culture Ministry announced her death this week, but did not state a cause. Pellicer was not widely known beyond her home country for much of her career because her late husband, the sculptor James Metcalf, tended to gain more notice, but she was beloved in Mexico for her copper creations. Pellicer received international praise in the last decade for the jewelry she made for the 100th anniversary of the gifting of the Statue of Liberty. She finished those in 1986, but did not gain international recognition for them until 2017, when they appeared at the Mexico City Gallery House of Gaga before MoMA PS1 in New York hosted a show of them the following year. Our most dramatic headline of the week, honeys: an American tourist survived impalement on a metal fence at Rome's Colosseum last week. The Italian newspaper Il Messaggero was the first to report that on Friday, May 2nd, a 47-year-old United States citizen and resident of Taiwan attempted to climb a metal fence in the Piazza del Colosseo, an area outside the landmark, before losing control and falling onto a metal spike, which pierced his back. Day Italian News reported that the man was, quote, stuck in a painful and dramatic position, end quote, until paramedics arrived at the scene and freed buried him over the course of 20 minutes, a spokesperson for the Coliseum Archaeological Park told Hyperallergic in an email shortly after the incident that no such thing had occurred at the site and called the widely reported narrative fake news, though they did admit, quote, an investigation by the Italian police force is ongoing at the moment, end quote, leading many news outlets to suspect there was more to the story. According to multiple media outlets, now the victim is reportedly recovering after a trip to San Giovanni Adolorata Hospital, where the injured tourist was immediately treated with surgery and, quote, over 80 stitches, end quote. We additionally heard that Bjork and Michelle Lamy have linked up to launch the 2025 Circa Prize. The prize in question is an annual one for emerging artists found in 2020 by the London-based Cultural Institute of Radical Contemporary Arts, or Circa. It invites early career artists of all creative backgrounds to submit work circling a yearly manifesto. This year's Refugia, quote, ecological sanctuaries where life thrives, especially in the face of an uncertain future, end quote. And the jury for this year will include Bjork, Michelle Lamy, Alvaro Barrington, and more. The winner will receive a £40,000 prize, and their work will be screened at London's Piccadilly Lights. The week additionally saw the ancient Greek author of Oxford's charred Herculaneum scroll revealed. As we all pretty much know, the ancient Roman town of Herculaneum and a massive library therein, known as the Villa of the Papyri, was encased in volcanic ash following the 79 CE eruption of Mount Vesuvius. What is less well known is that Villa of the Papyri belonged to Julius Caesar's father-in-law, and it contained over 1,700 papyrus scrolls which are thought to contain significant philosophical and literary texts by preeminent ancient Greek and Roman scholars. Research on the scrolls is ongoing and fostered by an international competition known as the Vesuvius Challenge, which awards monetary prizes to those who can help decipher the scrolls using AI technology, as the charred scrolls cannot be unfurled without completely destroying them. New Vesuvius Challenge work has revealed the contents of a scroll unknown for the last 2,000 years, which is now believed to be part of an influential multi-volume work by the Epicurean philosopher Philodemus from the 1st century CE titled On Vices. Researchers were able to identify some of the telltale information after X-raying the carbonized papyrus and creating a 3D reconstruction which was analyzed with AI before assessing visible traces of ink lettering from said X-ray images. With this finding, we're one step closer to understanding ancient Greek and Roman life that much better. We also heard that the UK unveiled the official coronation portraits of King Charles III and Queen Camilla on Tuesday, painted by artists Peter Cuffield and Paul Benny, respectively, to commemorate their 2023 coronation. These are among the first royal portraits since that of Elizabeth II in 1953. Coronation portraits are a big deal tradition among the British monarchy because they're known for not only capturing the royals but often indicating visual references to their power. The works are overseen by the Royal Collection, and the earliest of King James VI rendered in his coronation robes dates back to 1620. And finally, the London Zoo has discovered hundreds of old film reels featuring zoo oddities and animal celebrities and are now searching for experts to help digitize them. Officials from the archives of the Zoological Society of London are looking for help to digitize the fragile rolls of film from the 20th century, most likely the 50s and 60s, whose labels include, quote, underexposed bat film, end quote, and references to animal celebrities such as Chi-Chi the giant panda and Congo the chimpanzee. Zoological Society of London archivist Natasha Wakely tells the AP the archive is, quote, vast and fascinating, as you can expect for an organization that's been running for 200 years. But one thing we were really missing was footage, and that's why this project to digitize our film reels is really exciting, end quote. But it is also time sensitive per their statement, honeys. Some of the film has already been affected by a type of decay called vinegar syndrome, which is characterized by brittleness, shrinkage, and a sour odor, so we hope they can get that help soon. And that is our buzz for the week. Hope you've enjoyed. Hope you have, as always, found something that struck your fancy, something to look into a little further. We'll be back next week with more headlines, and in the meantime, take care of yourselves, hydrate or dihydrate. Till next time, honeys, talk soon. This podcast is produced, created, hosted, formerly edited, and fact-checked by master's degree holder Celia Bugno. Chris Meinhold is responsible for our editing, mixing, and our intro and outro music. Special thanks to him for that. And as always, remember to like, subscribe, share, comment, so on all your favorite listening as well as social media channels.